Today we'll create this light mode, dark mode effect only using HTML and CSS. In case you want to use the same colors and images that I'm using, I will put a GitHub link into the description. You can go to the images folder, for example, and download the images and take the colors or copy the colors from this GitHub file style.css. Right here we have this HTML file. We are going to link our CSS file, and inside of this HTML file we only need one line of code to make this effect happen. And this is adding an input of type checkbox. We also can give this input an ID, for example, day minus night, and this is all we really need inside of HTML to create this effect. Now we're going to go inside of the CSS file, and right here we can first start to select our root element and create the most important style that we really have for this effect, and this is basically the color minus scheme property that we have to set. And right here we are just going to say light dark. We also have to define a variable which defines our default background, and let's say this here is the toggle minus bg, and we are going to define a URL that points to our images folder, and inside of this images folder we want to get day1.jpg. And as you can see, this is basically this image. So this is our default background when we are in the light mode. Next up, let's define a body background color. And let's say this body has a width of 100%, a height of 100 viewport height. And now we can actually already start to use this color scheme by saying light minus dark. And right here we can define two properties. And one defines the property or the value for the light mode, and the other one defines the value for the dark mode. And you can use this light dark function basically for pretty much everything, every color you want to set. So you could also say color light minus dark, and then you can define two different colors if you wanted to, but we will only define the body color for our light mode and the body color for our dark mode. And as you can see, the body color for our light mode will basically be this light yellow, and the body color for our dark mode will be this dark blue. Let's remove this line. Now we will say that we want to have a display of flex, justify content of center, align items of center to see our button in the center of the screen. And now we're going to start to style this day night button by saying hashtag day night. We want to have a width of 225 pixels, a height of 100 pixels. Let's use a background. Right here we are going to use var of dash dash toggle background. We are also going to say appearance is equal to none. So we remove the default appearance from our checkbox. We can also add WebKit minus appearance and say that that one is none, and dash moz minus appearance is equal to none. As you can see, we already have this image. Let's also use a border minus radius of 50 pixels, so we get round borders. Now let's also set the background size by saying background minus size is equal to cover. So this image basically covers the background. Let's also define a cursor of pointer. So once we hover over, we get this effect. And let's also add a shadow, a box minus shadow. Let's use inset. Let's say 5 pixels, maybe 15 pixels, and RGBA of maybe 0, 0, 0, and let's use 0.6 for example. And obviously this should be box minus shadow, like so. And obviously you can experiment with the shadows and all of these values to make this look however you want. As you can see, so now we have this button, but we don't really see any form of toggle state. So in order to do so, or in order to add that, we are going to use the after element. So let's say day night : after. We are going to set the content to basically an empty string. We will say display is equal to block. We will have a width of 90 pixels and a height of 90 pixels. And as you can see, we have a height of 100 pixels. So this box basically takes up 90 of those 100 pixels of height. So let's give this one a background of maybe white, like so, and a position of absolute. So now we also need to use position relative for our day night button, because this here is the parent of our after element, and we want to position our element absolute to our day night box basically. So right now we can say border minus radius 50% to get a round border. So now we have this effect. Let's also say we have a gap from the top of maybe 10 pixels, or let's use 5 pixels, because now it's in the center, because we have a height of 100 pixels, this box takes up 90% or 90 pixels of the available space. So 5 pixels top and bottom, space this accordingly, or space this properly. Let's also say left 5 pixels. So now this button looks pretty good. Now we can add a box shadow once again, and we can actually just copy this line to use the exact same box shadow. And we also want to have an inset. And as you can see, maybe it makes a little more sense to say 0 right here. 0 pixels, 0 pixels. So it looks like a smooth transition. And we can maybe say we use 20 right here and only 0.2, for example, right here. Now, once we hover over this element, we maybe want to add a gap to the left. So we can do so by saying, or by just copying this line of code. And before we add the after element, we'll add the hover state. And we say once we hover over the element, we want to say left has a gap of maybe 15 pixels. So we add 10 pixels. It might make sense to also add a transition of all 0.5 seconds ease. Now we have this effect, as you can see. And now once the user clicks the button, so once the button is checked, we want to move this button to the right. Also for the buttons, I prepared some colors, so we will use this color for this button by pasting this in here. And now we will also create the element. So let's say hashtag day minus night colon checked colon after. So we will create the checked version. And here we can basically just copy the background. We're going to paste this one in here, and we will copy the background that we use for our checked state and replace RGB with our color code. And now once I check this, you can see the color changes already. I would also like to have a box shadow inset that is probably a little bit stronger for the dark blue. So I'm going to use this color, as you can see. And I also want to change the background of this entire button. So in order to do so, I'm just going to say hashtag day night, and we changed the checked state for our regular button. And let's say background is basically equal to an URL. We go inside of our images folder, and now we can say night1.jpg, for example. We also need background minus size, and we need to say cover. Now we have this effect. And as you can see, this looks a lot better already. We also need to move this button right here to the right. So in order to do so, we can go to this checked state and say, okay, from the left, let's use a gap of maybe 120 pixels. Let's say 125, which should be fine. And now this should look pretty good. Maybe we can even use 130. And now this looks pretty nice, yeah. And as you can see, now once the user hovers in the checked state, we can also add another state. So let's say colon checked, colon hover. So once we have the button checked and the user hovers, let's remove 10 pixels from the left. So we get the exact same effect that we used for the other hover state. So as you can see, now we get this hover effect. Once we click, the button jumps to the right, and it also jumps to the right. I would also like to have a transition when transitioning between the images. So in order to do so, we can say hashtag day night gets a transition of 0.5 seconds, all ease, for example, or actually, I think this is the wrong order. So let's use all 0.5 seconds and ease. So now we have this effect, as you can see. And I think this looks a lot better already, right? Now, in order to add icons right here in the middle, once we are in the different modes, we can go to our background colors. For example, we have this background color, and we can, for example, say, first of all, we are going to add an URL. We are going to go inside of our images folder, and let's use the sun.png for the foreground. Let's say this one is in the center, takes up 55% of the available space, and has no minus repeat. So now we have the sun in the center. Maybe we can also make it a little bit smaller. So let's say 45, for example. And obviously you can experiment with those values. And now we're going to do the exact same thing for our checked version. So right here, right in front of the background, let's say we're also going to add a URL. This points to our images folder and to our full moon.png. This one is also in the center, takes up maybe 40% of the available space, and we have no repeat as well. So now let's check this box, and as you can see, we are transitioning to this cool moon, and we are transitioning to this cool sun once we click this effect. Now we also obviously have to change the mode of our entire scheme. So in order to do so, we can go right here, and as you can see, we have this toggle BG background and we have this color scheme. And all we really have to do is we have to set this color scheme to dark once the button is toggled. So in order to do so, we can say if colon root colon has, so if this button has the class checked basically, so if day night is checked, so let's add that hashtag day night. If that one is checked, then we want to use color minus scheme of dark, for example. And as you can see now, once the button is checked, we have color mode of dark, and once we uncheck this one, we have the color mode of light basically.